Sister burned my 4 full scholarship letters in the grill. My parents backed her. 15 years later, 4 full ride scholarship letters. Gone. Turned to ash in a backyard grill while my parents watched and did nothing. How does a family justify destroying their own kid's future? And what happens when 15 years of silence finally runs out? Because here's what nobody tells you about that kind of betrayal. It doesn't stay buried. It compounds. It grows interest. And one day, it pays out in a way that nobody saw coming. This is the story of what I lost, what I built anyway, and what happened when my sister finally needed something that only I could give her. She should have let those letters burn quietly. She didn't account for what I'd become. I'm Declan, 34, a structural engineer based in Denver, Colorado. I'm 6'1", I run half marathons badly, and I have exactly 1 frame photograph in my entire apartment. Not a family, not a milestones, just a print of a mountain range I bought at a gas station because I liked the colors. I tell you that because it says something about how I've chosen to live since I left home at 18, and it gives you context for the kind of person I was dealing with and the kind of person I decided to become. When I was 17 years old, I received 4 full-ride scholarship offers. Division I school in Tennessee for engineering, a second in Georgia, a third in Colorado, which is ultimately where I ended up, and a 4th from a smaller technical institute in Ohio that came with a stipend on top of tuition and housing. My family was working class, not struggling, but careful. My parents owned a modest home in rural Indiana. My father worked at a distribution warehouse. My mother ran a daycare out of the house. College for me was not a given. It was something I had built toward over 4 years of 4.0 grades. Every AP class my high school offered, 2 science fair state placements, and enough math competitions to fill a drawer that I kept locked because I had already learned by then not to leave things I cared about within reach of certain people. My sister was 19, 2 years older. She had graduated the previous year from a cosmetology program at a community college. She was living at home. She had applied to a 4-year university the previous fall and been waitlisted, then declined, which she had taken personally in the specific way that people take personally the natural consequences of not putting in the work. The letters arrived the same week. Physical letters. This was 15 years ago, and several of the scholarship programs still sent official award packets by mail rather than exclusively by email. My mother had signed for the first package. By the time all 4 arrived across 5 days, she knew what they were. She'd stacked them on the kitchen counter. I remember coming home from school on a Thursday, seeing the stack, and feeling the particular kind of disbelief that happens when something you've worked for finally shows up in a real, tangible form. I stood in the kitchen for probably a full minute just looking at them before I opened the first one. My sister was sitting at the kitchen table. She watched me open every letter. She didn't say a word. Her face was completely still in a way that I recognized, even at 17, but didn't understand the full weight of until much later. My parents were both home that evening. We had dinner. I told them about the offers. My father asked clarifying questions about the stipend on the Ohio offer. My mother said she was proud of me. My sister was quiet. I went to bed with 4 scholarship letters in my hands and a future that felt, for the first time, genuinely possible. When I woke up the next morning, the letters were gone. I checked the counter first. Habit, they'd been sitting there the night before. Then the kitchen table. Then my room, thinking maybe I'd moved them myself and forgotten, which I knew wasn't true, but my brain needed to exhaust the safe explanations before accepting the real one. My sister was in the backyard when I looked out the sliding glass door. She was standing near the grill. There was smoke. I was outside in probably 4 seconds. The grill was open. There were scraps, mostly ash, one corner of an envelope that hadn't fully caught, the edge of a letterhead still partially readable. For envelopes, every single one. I turned around. She was looking directly at me, arms crossed, not apologetic, not even particularly agitated, just watching to see what I would do. "What did you do?" I said. Not a question, just words I needed to say out loud. "They were on the counter," she said. "I thought they were junk mail." She said it the way someone says something they know is not believed and don't need to be believed. The lie wasn't for my benefit. It was for the version of this conversation she was already preparing to have with our parents. I went back inside and found my mother in the living room. I told her what happened. I was surprisingly calm. I think I was still in shock. I explained clearly. My mother's face went through several expressions quickly and then settled into one I'd seen before. The expression she wore when she was calculating how to manage a situation without it becoming a real conflict. My father came in from the garage. I told him too. He looked at my sister, who had followed me in from the backyard. My sister said she thought they were junk mail. Again, my mother said, "Well, did you contact the schools? You can probably get new copies." And my father, and this is the part that didn't fade, this is the part that stayed fluorescent in my memory for 15 years. My father looked at my sister for a long moment and then looked at me and said, "You need to be more careful with important documents. Don't leave things lying around." He was telling me. I was the one being told to be more careful. I stood in that living room and understood, with absolute clarity, that nothing was going to happen to my sister. There was no consequence coming. There was no reckoning. There was going to be management. There was going to be the gentle shepherding of blame until it landed in the most convenient location, which was apparently on me for leaving college scholarship letters on my own kitchen counter. I called all 4 schools the following Monday from a payphone at school because I didn't want to make the calls from home. 3 of them had digital records and could reissue confirmation letters within a couple of weeks. The 4th, the Tennessee school, had a scholarship committee cycle that had already closed for the year. They were sympathetic. They told me the offer stood and would be redocumented in the fall enrollment materials if I chose to accept. I thanked them and hung up and stood outside the school for a while looking at nothing in particular. I accepted the Colorado offer. Not because it was the best financially, Ohio was better on paper, but because it was the farthest from Indiana and I had made a decision in that living room that I was not entirely conscious of making yet, but that was already complete. I was leaving and I was not coming back in any way that mattered. I drove to Colorado with everything I owned in the back seat of a 2001 Civic that my uncle had sold me for $800. I did not have a going away party. My mother cried at the door when I left. My father shook my hand. My sister was in her room and did not come out. I graduated in 4 years with a structural engineering degree and an internship that converted to a full-time position 8 months after I completed my licensing exams. I built the career the slow and deliberate way. Project by project, exam by exam, reputation by reputation. I did not go home for holidays. I sent birthday cards for a few years, then I stopped sending those too. My mother called me periodically. I answered sometimes. My father called twice. Once to tell me that my sister had gotten married. Once years later to tell me he'd had a health scare that turned out to be manageable. My sister never called. I bought an apartment in Denver at 28. I bought a house at 31, a real house, with a yard I don't particularly use but chose because the option matters. I have a professional reputation in my field that I am quietly proud of and publicly modest about. I make good money. I have a small group of friends who are not my family and whom I trust completely. I had not spoken directly to my sister in almost 14 years when she found my email addressed through a mutual relative and sent me a message that began, "I know it's been a long time and I know there's a lot between us, but I'm reaching out because I need your help." I want to be precise about what she was asking because the details matter. Her husband had been the primary income earner for their household. They had 2 children. About a year prior, he had left, walked out, filed for divorce, and relocated to a different state with what turned out to be the woman he'd been seeing for approximately 2 years. The divorce had been finalized 6 months before she wrote to me. The settlement had not been generous because the marital assets were more limited than my sister had understood, which told me something about how that marriage had functioned. She was living in the house they'd owned together, but she was behind on the mortgage. Not slightly behind. 6 months behind. The bank had already begun foreclosure proceedings. She had 60 days from the date she wrote to me before the process moved into the formal judgment phase under Indiana foreclosure law. What she needed, she said, was a loan. She named a specific number, $27,000, to cover the arrears, bring the mortgage current, and give her a 3-month buffer while she got back on her feet. She had done the research. She knew the number she needed. She also said she was sorry. One sentence. I know I wasn't a good sister to you, and I'm sorry for that. One sentence for a grill full of ash. I read the email twice. Then I went for a run. Then I came home and read it again. Let me tell you what I did not do. I did not write back immediately with cruelty. I did not forward it to anyone or post it publicly. I did not feel the rush of triumphant satisfaction that people imagine you feel in moments like this, because the reality of it was just heavy and sad and exhausting in the way that things involving family always are, regardless of what they did to you. What I did was respond within 48 hours and ask a question. Before I consider anything, I'd like to understand something. Do you remember what happened with my scholarship letters this summer before I left for college? Her response came back in 6 hours. She said yes. She said she remembered. She said she had been jealous. She said she had been in a bad place, and watching me succeed when she felt like she'd failed had made her do something she knew was wrong the moment she did it. She said she had told herself over the years that the outcome had been fine. I'd gotten the letters reissued. I'd gone to college. I'd built a good life, and that she'd used that narrative to avoid sitting with what she'd actually done. She said our parents had let her avoid it too, and that she'd let them because it was easier. It was the most honest thing I had ever seen her write. Maybe the most honest thing she was capable of. And it still wasn't enough. Not because I needed more apology, but because I had watched 15 years of what her patterns looked like, and I was not willing to hand $27,000 to someone whose primary evidence of growth was a candid email written under financial desperation. I didn't say no. What I did was structured. I called a HUD-approved housing counselor in Indiana. They operate for free under federal guidelines, and they can negotiate directly with mortgage servicers. I found the contact information, wrote it out clearly in an email, and sent it to my sister with a detailed explanation of the foreclosure timeline under Indiana Code 32-30-10, which gives homeowners specific response windows at each stage of the process. A HUD counselor can sometimes negotiate a forbearance or a loan modification that avoids the full arrears payment. She may not have needed all $27,000 if she had the right representation at the right moment. I also connected her through a contact I had with a nonprofit legal aid organization in her county that handles foreclosure defense for households under a specific income threshold. Her income, post-divorce, likely qualified. I told her I would not be sending money directly. I told her I would cover one specific thing, the fee for a 1-hour consultation with a foreclosure attorney, so she could understand exactly where she stood legally before making any decisions. I sent that payment, $350, directly to the attorney's office, not to her. She wrote back 2 days later. She was not pleased. The email had a different tone than the previous ones, less reflective, more pointed. She said she had come to me because she needed real help, not a list of phone numbers. She said she didn't have time to navigate bureaucracy. She said she'd hoped that after everything, I would be willing to step up for family. I noticed that phrase, after everything, as though the scale of what she'd done to me was a point in her favor now, as though I owed her something proportional to the damage she'd caused. I wrote back once more, calmly. I told her that what I'd sent her wasn't a list of phone numbers. It was a roadmap that, if followed, gave her the best mathematical chance of keeping the house without depleting any one person's resources. I told her that the foreclosure attorney I'd already paid for could give her specific legal options she didn't currently know she had. I told her I wished her well. Then I stopped responding. What happened next? I learned from my mother, who called me approximately 3 weeks later with the specific tone she uses when she wants to tell me something she knows I won't like. My sister had called our parents. She had not, to my mother's knowledge, contacted the HUD counselor. She had not called the legal aid office. She had attended the attorney consultation I'd paid for, the one thing, and been told that her servicer was likely eligible for a modification request given her income change, and that she should pursue it immediately with documentation. Instead of doing that, she had called our parents and told them I had refused to help. My mother wanted me to know that my father was upset. My father felt that given the circumstances, given that this was family, given that I had the financial means, I should reconsider. I let my mother finish speaking. Then I asked her one question. When my scholarship letters were burning in the backyard grill, and I came to you and Dad and told you what happened. What do you remember about that day? Long pause. Declan, she said. That was a long time ago. I know, I said. What do you remember? Another pause. We handled it the best we could. You told me to be more careful with important documents, I said. Those are the exact words Dad used. I remember them because I've had 15 years to remember them. She didn't say anything. I've already done more for her than anyone did for me that day, I said. I paid for legal advice she hasn't used. I sent her options that could actually solve the problem. I'm not sending $27,000 to someone who has not demonstrated that she'll use it the way it needs to be used. She's your sister. I know who she is, I said. And I ended the call. The foreclosure finalized. She lost the house. I won't pretend that didn't sit heavily with me. There were children involved, and the children hadn't done anything to me. I verified through the same relative who'd passed along her email that she had transitioned to a rental, a manageable one, from what I could tell, and that the kids were stable and in school. That information mattered to me. I needed to know they were okay, even while holding firm on everything else. My parents have not called since that conversation with my mother. It's been 7 months. I don't know if that silence is anger or guilt or simply the natural settling of a family that was never as structurally sound as I'd wanted to believe. My sister sent me one final email for months after the house was gone. No request this time. No ask. Just a paragraph that said she understood now that she had made choices and that those choices had costs and that she didn't expect me to carry the cost of what she'd burned down, figuratively this time. She said the lawyer I'd paid for had actually opened a door she hadn't known existed, and that even though she hadn't walked through it in time to save the house, the information had helped her negotiate a better exit timeline, which had made the transition less chaotic for her kids. She didn't ask for anything. She just told me. I've read that email probably 6 times. I haven't written back yet. I might. I'm still deciding what I have to say and whether saying it would be for me or for her, and I've learned to wait until I know the difference. What I know is this. My father told a 17-year-old boy to be more careful with important documents while ash was still warm in the grill. My sister spent 15 years letting that moment stay buried, because the burial was convenient for her. And when she finally needed something from the only person in that family who had actually built something, she found out that the things she burned hadn't just been paper. It had been my patience. It had been my willingness to absorb the cost of other people's choices. And those things, unlike scholarship letters, do not get reissued. I built an entire engineering career out of nothing but spite and AP calculus, and the least you can do for that level of dedication is hit subscribe. My sister burned 4 full scholarship letters and thought the story ended there. Stick around. The structures I build now don't collapse, and neither does this channel. Here's what I want to know from you. When my sister sent that email asking for $27,000 with one sentence of apology for burning my entire future in a backyard grill, what would you have done? Would you have sent the money? Sent nothing? Or done exactly what I did and handed her a roadmap she ultimately didn't follow? And here's the real question. My father told me to be more careful with my documents while they were literally still on fire. If that had been your parent, would you have picked up the phone when your mother called 15 years later? Drop it in the comments. And subscribe, because people who burned your scholarship letters should at least fund your audience growth indirectly.